They were farmers, carpenters, coal miners, iron workers, clerks, lawyers, and politicians, recruited mainly from counties of southern Ohio. By war's end, they will have engaged in nearly every major battle in the Western Theater and marched with Sherman to the sea. In 1861, President Abraham Lincoln called upon the states to furnish 300,000 volunteers to subdue the Confederate States of America. In September, Ohio Governor William Dennison ordered the creation of many units, including the 53rd Regiment. He appoints Jesse J. Appler as the colonel. Appler, from Portsmouth, was a businessman and a one-time leader of the local militia. Thinking that Ohio needed a mounted rifleman regiment, Appler has these posters printed and distributed throughout southern Ohio. After the fact, it was decided that the unit would be an infantry unit, and the 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry was born. The captains recruited men from Jackson, Pike, Scioto, Galley, Athens, Meigs, and other southern Ohio counties. Once the companies were at full strength, they would head to Camp Diamond for training before heading to war. Camp Diamond was located at the small southern Ohio town of Jackson Courthouse. Jackson was built at the confluence of ancient buffalo and Indian trails, where salt springs bubbled out of the ground. In 1855, Salt Lick Furnace was built along Salt Lick Creek about a half-mile from the town. It was designed to process iron using stone coal and also process the valuable commodity of salt for sale. Besides the furnace, there was built a company office and other outbuildings. The company also built a small community known as Gideontown, which was a collection of brick houses built to house the furnace workers and was placed along the old road. In 1857, the company failed and sold the furnace, which was then renamed a diamond furnace. This company's luck was no better, and the furnace stood idle. It was this area that was leased to the government to be used as training ground for the troops. The old furnace buildings, including the houses of old Gideontown, were used by the regiment. The men began to arrive in September of that year. The colonel outlawed drinking and card playing at camp. Some sort of prayer meeting or religious service was held at the camp nearly every night, and the men crowded into churches in Jackson on Sundays for service. According to Jackson resident Davis Mackley, the troops were in town nearly every day, but they were well behaved. With the arrival of troops, there were also sutlers that set up shop. Ladies of ill repute were housed in log cabin shanties built by some of the men in the hills north of camp where they could provide their services. Undoubtedly, there were undesirables that signed up for service, and from time to time they did cause trouble around camp and town. But for the most part, the troops were welcomed by the citizens and had a great relationship with them. The men continued training as fall turned into winter. As a token of appreciation to the regiment, the town held a great feast for the boys on the nearby meadow at the adjacent farm of John Long on December 17th. Nearly 1,000 citizens from in and around Jackson brought food and all enjoyed dinner on the unseasonably warm day. The citizens of Jackson presented a battle flag to the 53rd that the ladies in town had sewn together. As 1862 arrived in camp, so too did the measles. Quickly spreading through the camp, there were nearly 150 men ended up sick. They were treated at the camp by the regimental assistant surgeon, Dr. Bing, until hospital quarters could be set up in town. The ladies of Jackson came to help them. They would sit and care for them from morning till night. Their service was instrumental in bringing the men back to health. However, 2 of them didn't get better and died. The first being Austin Crowell, who died the day the regiment left town. A few minutes past midnight on February 17, 1862, the town was awakened by the prolonged whistle of a locomotive, and soon the news spread over town that the 53rd was ordered to move. The 1,000 men of the regiment left Jackson and arrived at Portsmouth, Ohio, where they spent the day on leave. From there they moved on to Paducah, Kentucky, where they awaited placement and orders into the Army. From Paducah, the regiment moved down the Tennessee, where they would be baptized in fire, down the Tennessee River to war. On March 19th, the regiment arrived at Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee. As part of the 3rd Brigade of the 5th Division commanded by General Sherman, they were assigned to camp on the Ray Farm near an old Methodist church called Shiloh. As April 5th arrived, Confederate cavalry and troops were seen by pickets and reported to General Sherman, who falsely believed the Confederates to be some 30 miles away. As Sunday, April 6th arrived, the camp was stirring. A 15-year-old Jackson boy named William Still was busy making flapjacks when the pickets came running into camp screaming that the whole rebel army is right behind them. Young William grabbed his drum and began to drum the long roll, alerting the camp and the army that the attack was coming, earning him a place in history as the drummer boy of Shiloh. The rebel lines came through the trees and toward the 53rd. Colonel Appler ordered the regiment to form, then wheel about and fall back. Lieutenant Colonel Fulton reported that the colonel took off and cried out, "Save yourselves!" Some of the officers ignored the colonel and formed their ranks, forming with adjacent regiments and fighting. Then it happened. Frank Smith, the oldest man of the regiment at around 62 years old, was hit by multiple rounds at about the same time and fell to his death. He was the first casualty of the 53rd and the second man to die at the Battle of Shiloh. The 53rd would eventually be regrouped back at Vicksburg Landing. On April 8th, with help of reinforcements, the Union troops beat back the rebels. The colonel was forced to resign and escorted to the boats and returned to Ohio. Captain Jones from Waverly was promoted to colonel and would go on to lead the men in redemption throughout the war. The 53rd had 7 killed, 39 wounded, and 5 missing at Shiloh. The regiment fought throughout the South at nearly every major battle. Places like Vicksburg, Mississippi, Atlanta, Georgia, Kennesaw Mountain, Georgia. Marched with Sherman to the sea, then turned up the coast and into the Carolinas. 12 officers and 264 men died by war's end. At the conclusion of the Civil War, the men made their way to Washington, D.C. and then to Little Rock, Arkansas, where they were mustered out of service in August in 1865. The 53rd had served for nearly 4 years, traveled over 6,400 miles, and fought in 69 battles. General Sherman is reported to have said the 53rd was the equal of any regiment, anywhere. In 1885 and 1887, the men of the 53rd decided to have a reunion at Jackson. They unfurled the old battle flag and marched from downtown Jackson to Camp Diamond. Some carved out pieces of wood as memorabilia from the old guardhouse, and the citizens decorated the area with flags. In time, the men of the 53rd faded into oblivion. The memory of their presence in Jackson faded as well. Their old training ground forgotten. The old furnace was dismantled. The courses of the creeks changed. The old regimental headquarters was ripped apart by a tornado in 1881. Some of the old houses used by the troops still remain. But now, 153 years later, the community has all but forgotten her 53rd Regiment and Camp Diamond.